Sega.
Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transform.
Hey, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Sonic the Hedgehog here, and I'm from the likes of the Maxi Toys videos. After the events of Kirby's Dream Land 3 Let's Play, which I did manage to recently finish due to Kirby Marathon that we're still about to be doing, now I'm finally back into the Sonic the Hedgehog games. Now we're tackling through the sequel to the forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, known as Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, PC, Steam, Nintendo Wii U, and Nintendo 3DS. Blimey, that's quite a lot of platforms there. Anyway, so this game did first came out in 2012 in amongst with PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 version, and the version I'll be playing through, as you can see on the button icons, is definitely the Xbox 360 version because of, you know, the button icons, and especially noticeable this game is runs at 1080p and all that stuff. I'm hoping this frame rate doesn't go as completely lacking. Oh yeah, we got ourselves a new character, and that's what happens if you manage to able to set up in the forms of Christmas Day, and that was back in 2012 by the way. If you manage to set the calendar up to, you know, the 25th of December or something, you weren't able to actually unlock a new character, but I wonder what it could be, I wonder. But anyways though, so the main focus of this Let's Play as far as before we're able to get things started with the forms of this game is going to be the main focus is career mode, which is basically as how the actual mode itself we're going to be running to. And before we talk for this over with, the forms of the Xbox 360 version, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, Wii U, and PC Steam version, I'm assuming these versions came out in during the likes of 2012, but I may be wrong about the PC version. But in 2013, on the other hand, that the 3DS version gets its release, probably because they need to add a little bit more polish to it. So, anyway, so before we get to this kind of stuff, here we have ourselves a few other modes, like the forms of World Tour, which is basically a single-player version of the main game. And of course, Grand Prix mode makes a return ever since Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. And that could be the same applies for Time Attack and Single Race. So, the main focus of this point here is the forms of World Tour, and I also want to point itself for Grand Prix until the future points, because we're not going to get into Grand Prix mode until the meantime, because for now, let's get started with the forms of World Tour mode. So it's basically, it's like a mission mode in the forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, except there's going to be multitasking going on here. So even then know that, yeah, I just want to point out at this point, folks, that this game is going to be a lot more longer compared to how it does in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. This is probably due to World Tour mode, and especially noticeable with the Grand Prix mode especially. And, yeah, there's not much I can really tell for this point and onwards. So even then, no, I wish I had decided to go ahead and do this Let's Play back in June in 2013, but it was never planned out. So anyways, From the start though, we can only select one location at the moment, so there are 5 locations all in total. Well, at least until 6, because we'll get into that in a moment. Because for now, let's jump into Sunshine Coast, which is the forms of the first ever location we're going to be doing with at this point. So yeah, let's get to it. And even under that, it tells you how much stars you've managed to collect through for that particular run through. So from the start, we can only select up to 2 different races, which are both Sonic the Hedgehog course and one from Panzer Dragoon. Which, by the looks of all that, we'll get to that until right about now. For this particular stage selection screen, it does feel slightly similar to how it does in Super Mario Galaxy 2's world map, which even though that does look pretty cool by the looks of all that. So let's go in those in chronological order, but in forms of some of these challenges worked out, starting with the race in the forms of the very first level throughout, and this one is based off from Sonic the Hedgehog. And before you start the actual objective, you can select up to 3 different difficulties: easy, medium, or hard. The only differences between these 3 difficulties is the fact that you can able to get yourselves the number of stars you get depends on what difficulty you accepted in. So for instance, if I like to tackle for this particular objective in easy mode, I get 1 star, medium will give you 2 stars, and if you go to do this on hard mode, you get yourselves all 3 stars. Very much like how it does in the forms of the 3 free application games on the iPads, including Angry Birds as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and do this on hard mode to start up with. And a character selection choice. You start things off with 10 characters, which I believe it might be exactly identical to Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, but in addition to those 10 default characters from the start, as you can see, we got ourselves both Metal Sonic and this familiar kid by the forms of Alex Kidd. So as usual, we got ourselves Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, which is actually unlocked from the start this time around, as opposed to unlocking him from the forms of the shop menu from the first game. And we have II as normal, and Beat also unlocked from the get-go, instead of like just trying to able to unlock him from the shop. We got Amy Rose, Beady Joe, same thing for how it does in the forms of Knuckles, Beat, and you also need to unlock him in the first game by the forms of the shopping mode, but he's now unlocked from the start. New one in the lineup by the forms of Mimi from Super Monkey Ball, and in the forms of Ooh La La, which she already unlocked from the get-go in this game as opposed to in the first game. And we got ourselves our special guest not to mention by the forms of Ralph, based off from Wreck-It Ralph, which is pretty cool, but I'll mention about him until we get to later. Of course, if you actually access to limited editions of the forms of this game, if you ever purchased this on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, and especially the special edition version on the Wii U version of the game, you get yourselves the Metal Sonic character. Oh yeah, that could be the same applies to the 3DS versions as well, which I apologize if my tongue is going really twisty around here. And we'll get to more details on Metal Sonic before later, but for now, we got ourselves Alex Kidd, which by actually access to him is by simply we need to set the calendar to Christmas Day in the forms of 2012. So yeah, that's how you're able to actually unlock Alex Kidd. And just like before, Honor's case, just like how it does it in Knuckles, Beats, Beady Joe, and especially Ooh La La, Alex Kidd was actually unlocked from the get-go, unless if you're able to actually set the calendar up into Christmas Day back in 2012. So that's just my main consumption with that. So anyways, let's get started. And well, to start things off, we're going to be selecting with Sonic the Hedgehog, including myself. So even then, let's get started by the forms of Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. Excuse me. Anyways though, so let's get started by the forms of the first stage in this particular game. And this one is called Ocean View. But even though, because of this though, it doesn't tell you what the stage is named though, unless if you actually look up on internet or the main menus, all that stuff. So anyways, let's get started here. So, let's see if we get ourselves a nice little boost. So yeah, this is how it works, or the gameplay works in the forms of how the fact with Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. Basically, this game plays exactly like how it does in the forms of the this predecessor, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, except there are some quite nifty features around here. Like for instance, you can now actually race between 10 races or 10 players instead of like the usual 8. Kind of like how it does in any other Mario Kart games, the only 2 exceptions, which are Mario Kart Wii and Mario Kart 8/Deluxe. So that's pretty obvious at that point. You're still able to drift and all that stuff and performing tricks. Now performing tricks is a little bit differently compared to how it does in the forms of towards its predecessor in the forms of, you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, is that in order to actually make the trick system works, is that you need to actually keep an eye on the actual premises of the right analog stick. Because if you manage to able to time your right analog stick at certain points, this way you would able to actually perform yourself some tricks. Which even then, I'll show you to you when we actually get to that point. So even then though, this particular first stage, as you expected from any other Sonic games, is basically based off from Seaside Hill, which even then, now you've already know about the Seaside Hill environments all the time since, you know, Sonic Heroes, Sonic Generations, etc, and Sega Superstars Tennis and all that stuff. And, oh, they have something new for a change, because even then, since this game's title suggests Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, it's by simply we need to able to transform into not only boat, but also a flying vehicle for that matter when we get to the next stage, because even then, no, we haven't get into the flying sequence until when we get to the next course, as I mentioned earlier. Because this game is feels exactly similar to how it does in the forms of not only Mario Kart 7, but also Diddy Kong Racing. Because I say those two games, oh, I've got swarmed by these little swarms of bees around here. Oh god, that Beady Joe's almost gonna catch up to me. Come on, first place, yes. Because yes, if you want to able to actually get yourselves three stars, you need to be getting first place though. Because if you don't, then you have to redo the entire mission again. So even that will be no good. And the first achievement on that particular run through, which is by the forms of magic. I can't remember what this particular name was called for that achievement, but you can get yourself stickers in addition to that as well. So even then, no, yeah. Another new feature in this game is the forms of experience points. Every time you actually just manage to able to... Okay, so we got ourselves some stickers. So basically, every time you get yourself some of these achievements in this game, especially noticeable in trophies on the PlayStation 3 or the Vita versions, you get yourself some stickers in addition to that, by the way. So anyways, with the experience points, you can actually level up for your specific characters, very much like an RPG type of style like this, although except it's a racing game instead of like the MMO RPG type of style. And let's go ahead and unlock this particular gate, which actually unlocks you this particular next sections of the actual world tour itself. But we're not going to go into the actual this stage in particular just yet, because we now move on to the next stage. And the next character choice we're going to be choosing is Tails, because obviously, compared to how it does in new forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, granted the main focus on that game is usually focuses on Grand Prix, and most of the time though anyway. But in this game, this time around though, I feel like I'm going to be going over all the characters in the game, so even then I'm like to able to do that. So, anyway, so let's get into this next racing track in this game, and it's actually based off from Panzer Dragoon, which is basically based off from the Sega Saturn game, Panzer Dragoon. Even then though, the Panzer Dragoon saga, especially with the main series for that matter, I've heard of them. I've heard of the particular series, but I've heard there's actually a Panzer Dragoon saga came out on the Sega Saturn, and that is the most expensive Sega Saturn game came out on that particular run. So anyways though. So as you can tell already, the difficulty I'm going to be selecting this time around though is the forms of medium, because I'll get to my major gripes I have with this game compared to what it does in the first game, because even though, first off, we'd like to point things out, this track is basically based off from Panzer Dragoon, as I mentioned earlier, but this track is known as Dragon Canyon, because as far as I'm aware, because, you know, because normally this game doesn't tell you the actual name tracks when you're trying to able to start the race off, unlike the first game, but as long as you're able to actually navigate through the main menu or stuff like that, then you would classify to able to actually notice something like that. So we got ourselves boost pads right there, which it feels kind of similar to how it does it in the forms of speed sneakers from the first game, except they're all just pink arrows. So anyway. So yeah, it's pretty amazing to actually see how the fact that we can now actually race up to 10 players instead of like the usual 8. Which kind of looks a bit though, because expecting that the entire track selection might be a little bit more, well, kind of larger than that or something like that, although I'm not exactly sure how much courses they actually contain though, but even then, we'll find out soon enough. But anyway, so yeah, there's not much else you can tell with this particular game itself. It's basically the exact same game as of how it does in the forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, but in forms of how the fact that, well, not only that, but we also actually introduce into new things, kind of like how it does it in Mario Kart 7 and even Diddy Kong Racing as a result. Well, even then, you know I mentioned this before, that this game is remarkably similar to how it does in Mario Kart 7, but also Diddy Kong Racing as well, but in the Nintendo 64, / Nintendo DS for a remake. It's most likely because, well... Sorry for a little bit of an awkwardness, quietness going on here, folks, but, because, yeah, basically you're driving around the actual road, just like how it does its predecessor, as you probably already know. But also you're going to be riding on the actual, you're transforming into your vehicle into a boat-mobile, and able to actually drive on water. And possibly something else, and because speaking of such, we'll get to that until when we get to the later portions of the game, because, you know, this game is going to be much more longer compared to how it does it in new forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing after all. But anyways though. So as you expected, there are 3 laps to be expected, but even then, that's as far as I can tell already, so... Now, if you want to able to anticipate through races, as far as you already noticed I was doing, basically, in order to actually get 3 stars, is very simply we need to claim first place. However though, if you want to do the easy or the medium difficulty, then you weren't able to actually get 3rd or higher, because even then, if you go lower than 3rd, then you pretty much failed the mission. So even then, I suggest you're able to actually become very, very careless when it comes to able to doing on that. And now we can have the ability to fly! Very much like how it does in the forms of the air gliding, in the forms of the hang gliding, sorry, but in forms of Sonic, no, Mario Kart 7, sorry. Apologize for that little, translation errors and all that stuff. But anyway, and it's also because of how the fact that in Diddy Kong Racing, they can able to actually use the plane to also fly around the stage, which is pretty cool. But except unlike how it does in the forms of Diddy Kong Racing, that you always have to stuck with one vehicle, which is pretty obvious, because I'm pretty sure that you always have to stuck with one vehicle, because one of your cars can actually do multitude of things. Like if you bypass this little particular blue ring, this will actually represent you actually going to be transforming into things, which is really awesome. But even then, that's as far as I can tell. But anyway, let's go ahead and finish off this race, and hopefully, God forbid, don't able to bump onto any walls and all that stuff. And... booyah! Mission succeeds. So yeah, today was actually in forms of the 20th of April, in case if you probably missed it by that date in mind. Because basically of how this functions is the fact that, well, we've only got, next week until the forms of Nintendo Labo is about to be releasing and all that stuff. I have no idea what's up with Tails' model in this particular game. It just feels a little bit too weird for my liking. And we got another sticker award, and we can able to actually continue on, so yeah. So yeah, that's just how this goes with the World Tour. You basically, after when you complete certain missions, you move on to the next. But even then, that, you know. Of course, it doesn't stop there, though, on the other hand, because when you move on to the next objectives, or the next selection of objectives we're about to be getting to later on. So anyways, now we're done with those 2, and now let's move on to the next new challenge by the forms of Drift Challenge. Which, by the looks of it though, is basically the returning challenge by the forms of the first game, except it now calls it Drift Challenge. And the next character I'm going to be selecting is Knuckles the Echidna. So even then, I might as well able to go with those characters in the chronological order. Even then, I might as well able to get into the Metal Sonic DLC, which we'll get into later on, throughout the majority of this Let's Play. But for now, we'll just stuck with the forms of the chronological order ones. So, let's get to it by the forms of Drift Challenge. And as you expected, by the forms, if you ever play through mission mode, in the forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, if you perform certain drifts or what have you, you gain yourself some stars in the process. And the highest rank you can get is in forms of Triple A's and all that stuff. In this game, I've already mentioned about this before, it depends on what difficulty you select. If you manage to complete that specific challenge, then you would able to gain yourselves some stars in the process, which the stars can be used for, can be summed up as like one thing, and those 2 forms of unlocking things, which we'll get to that a bit sooner or later. But for now, let's go ahead and explore for this particular course. By the way, does this course look familiar to you? It appears to be the returning course from the forms of you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, but in forms of Shumby Downtown from the forms of the first game, which is usually based off from Jet Set Radio, obviously, or Jet Set Radio Future, as was a sense of confusion ever since during the likes of the first game. And as you can tell, the music has been playing right about now is entirely different this time around. Speaking of which, I don't think there's any way we can actually change the music this time around, unfortunately. Because even then, I really do miss that particular option right there, so even then. Excuse me. Because basically, the whole fact that one thing that makes it so unique in your forms of the first game that you can able to actually set your own variations of the music that you already know and love, and able to actually enjoy them so much. And you would able to actually set the music up in your forms of any particular points for their certain franchises. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Event complete.
So yeah, there we go, folks. Now we've pretty much gone through that particular challenge and get some more experiences. Well, some experiences for Knuckles, and we've somehow, for some reason, that we've actually unlocked shouldn't be in downtown, because yes, much like how it does in the first game, that you normally have to unlock like tracks, but it forms in the first game that you have to unlock tracks via the shops. But in this game, this time around, there's the fact that you can actually unlock courses from World Tour, if I remember rightly, because even then, that way it does the thing for you. So there we go. Now we can actually move on to the next event here, which is Race Again, but now it's actually based off from Afterburner. I've heard of Afterburner before, but I haven't really exactly played on that, but I've noticed that from the Sega universe. So anyways, next character we're going to be moving on to is Ai from Super Monkey Ball. And he still managed to use himself this banana-shaped cart, from the looks of all things. And even though everything else will be injected and done. And even though that, since you know how the fact that in the first game of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, normally Mimi was not included in the entire roster until the second game came out, which is the forms of this game. But it wasn't the first time that she's actually made it to the actual Sega universe, but that honor goes to what's classified for same by the forms of Sega Superstars Tennis, because in that game usually focuses around almost exactly similar to Mario Tennis games, except, well, it's basically based off from Sega themes. So, anyway, so this is the forms of Career Zone, or in this case, Carrier Zone, if I like to say so specifically. Because the entire impression of this track is usually how it goes. Basically, we're going around almost like very similar to the Baby Park type of design, except the fact that there's going to be some... excuse me about that, sorry about that. But basically, you can able to actually drift around on that specific curve, and then basically, if you manage to drift at the right time, then you would able to get your speed going. So if you know, that's the entire impression of this this particular stage goes. I will say though, is that the visuals in this game do look absolutely gorgeous, especially if you play this on the Xbox 360 version. If you actually just manage to hook up your HDMI cable, especially noticeable with the PlayStation 3 version and even the Wii U version. Apparently though, probably judging by the fact of this sense of lighting. And also the PC version / Steam version, if you like to pronounce that. Normally you get yourself 60 frames per second. Why does it bring out 60 frames per second, just like Sonic Generations, whilst in the console versions does not? My answer to that, I'm not sure. But even then, compared to how it does in your forms of, I would say Sonic Forces, that in Sonic Forces, normally you get 60 frames per second in the forms of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One version, and excluding the PC version as well. On the other hand, on the Switch version, it's basically 30 frames per second, and also that could be the same applies for, I would say for the likes of, I don't know what's another game that usually runs between differently from 60 to 30 frames. I'm presuming Sonic Unleashed from the Xbox 360 version and the PlayStation 3, because I'm pretty sure the PlayStation 3 version can sometimes run in the forms of mixture between 60 frames per second and sometimes 30 frames, because of depends on not there's actually too much on everything with you. And basically in the Xbox 360 version it's still pretty much stuck with the forms of just 30 frames for the entire time. And I've definitely noticed that the PlayStation Vita version looks kind of very, very, very cool looking as well, despite the fact that it actually runs slightly well than the 3DS was, because I'm sure not the 3DS version, when it comes to the graphical standpoint, is considered to be the worst looking of the bunch, because usually normally the 3DS quality of games usually feels not as like HD or what have you, because even then though, that's as far as I can tell at that point. So anyways, yeah, because the reason why I decided to actually now finally get into this game is because you know how the fact that Piglet has recently done with the forms of, well, you know, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing back in during the likes at the very end of 2017, and now it's time to shine with the forms of Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, if you're probably wondering for this year, because you know how the fact that thanks to the forms of SWS or in this case SXSW panel 2018 when it comes to Sonic the Hedgehog. Among with Sonic Mania Plus, the informs of how to fact with any other platforms, but informs of the PC versions or something like that, and PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch, which not only brings us in a new update of Sonic Mania Plus, but also but informs of the physical release here and there as well. But it's also but informs of the upcoming Sonic racing game, which as far as I'm aware is going to be, you know, most likely Sonic focused instead of like Sonic and the Sega Universe and all that stuff. How did Amy get onto the other side? Oh, you gotta be kidding me. So there goes my second place of this run through of this particular Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. This is my major gripe I have with this game, as far as I might as well get into that right about now. The rubber banding AI in this game is ridiculous. I mean, it's nothing like how it does in new forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing that are pretty much dominated for the most part, especially in advanced level, unless if you actually be trying to able to anticipate for expert mode. But in this game in particular, that the rubber banding AI is significantly overpowered compared to how it does in new forms of the first game is handled. Well, because they've already know where the shortcuts are, depends on what difficulties you select. I mean, normally it's not so bad in easy mode, unless if you get a lot of practice on that particular main mechanics of the game. But when you get to the harder difficulties and all that stuff, things can get ridiculous. But anyways, so we can now actually select the race mode, or in this case the race challenge, or versus rounds. I'm assuming we might actually go for versus round for last, because even I know that because this video is almost over, that means we can able to actually show you guys how to actually unlock those characters, because you normally have, you know, 10 default characters from the start, including the likes of the other 2, if you manage to get one from the forms of access to the limited edition. By the way, you can actually now finally buy the forms of Metal Sonic in addition to the bonus course you can actually get with it, and definitely funny forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing that you still normally get Metal Sonic body forms of both games, except in the forms of Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, the bonus track you can get is the forms of how the fact that you can actually unlock yourselves, you know, the Death Egg Zone, the Egg Hangar, and then in this game you can now actually unlock the Out Bay track, which in this case, or in this case, Outrun Bay, which I'll get into more details on that once we get to that specific stage onto the extras video department. But for now, let's go and anticipate the forms of versus challenges. So basically, in the forms of this challenge works is about how the fact that you can tell in the bottom left corner of the screen, it tells you how much further away the distance are between either you or your rival opponents. Even though you have to race against with 3 opponents, and every time when you actually just manage to face off against with those 3 opponents, then you would able to actually complete the challenge. So even though if you manage to go all the way to the top of the green gauge, then you would normally proceed to the next round. So even though as soon as when it starts flickering with your icon image, then you know you're pretty much moving on to the next round. So you know, again, there are 3 opponents to race off against with. So yeah, next up we have is Mimi, and the final one of the bunch is definitely Amigo, because strangely enough though, in the first game he's actually unlocked from the get-go in the first game, but now he apparently becomes himself his unlockable character this time around. Granted, because of how the fact that this game is heavily much more focused on the forms of World Tour mode, instead of like the usual shopping mode or the Grand Prix mode or something like that. So that just makes the entire impression of the game of unlocking characters significantly different. So anyways, let's go ahead and just do some drifting, bloody forms of, you know, just, you know, do a level 3 drifting. Oh, god dang it. Another thing that did kills me by the forms of how the fact that with the rubber banding AI, first off, they always try to catch up to you at some points, and second of all, they always attempt to desperately need their items desperately, just like how it does in the forms of Mario Kart Wii, even though the amount of problems I have with Mario Kart Wii is still present there with the rubber banding AI and all that stuff. I think that could be the same applies from this game this time around though for me, because I just cannot for the life of me, whenever I get to that certain point of the next couple of challenges up ahead, for the life of me, I can never seem to beat the later missions with the forms of higher difficulties. You can definitely tell why when we get to later. But for now, we go to the third and final opponent, which is the forms of Amigo. And speaking of such, excuse me about that, sorry about that. And we've managed to win by, oh, we got another achievement, Meteor Strike. So yeah, that stage right there is called Samba Studio, which is basically based off Samba de Amigo. Pretty cool for that level actually. And we got ourselves another sticker, and yeah. So, I'm afraid, guys, we're going to have to end things off here. Although, before we end things off, actually, I'm actually going to be going after the unlockable character, which we need to acquire a certain amount of stars in order to actually unlock those specific characters once you're able to proceed in the game. So, yeah, that's the entire impression of that throughout. So, speaking of which, let's go ahead and unlock not only another mission we have to tackle through, which is the Boost Challenge. Actually, I might as well get into that more on that in the next video, because for now, let's go ahead and unlock Amigo. Yes. So that way we can actually keep that character at least for a longer period of time. So anyways though folks, we're going to have to end things off at this point here, so join me next time but Let's Play Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. It's the fact that we're going to be moving on into the continuation of the forms of Sunshine Coast, on the forms of the Boost Challenge and the race on the forms of not only the Sonic stage, but also a Super Monkey Ball level as well. So that's pretty obvious with that particular next time progression goes, and we've already got 11 stars. So yeah, see you guys next time. Later, fellas.